Hi, you're about to watch the full version of my interview with the writer Josh Trujillo, all about The Wizard of Oz and Wicked and their importance to queer culture. Check the description below for links to all of Josh's work and to my full video. And now, on with the interview.
My name is Josh Trujillo. I'm a writer of comic books and video games based in Los Angeles, California, and I'm happy to chat all things Oz.
Hooray! So tell me about your history with The Wizard of Oz, like going back to when you were young.
So, Wizard of Oz is one of those things I knew before I had memory. I just remember always loving it, mostly through the 1939 MGM musical. And so that was an obsession for me. It was on VHS just constantly in my house, me singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow while I'm peeing in the bathroom, like little videos of me at the family functions doing my Judy Garland impression. And there was just something captivating about that movie and the songs from it and the colors and the vibrancy that I think I've said this to you before. The Wizard of Oz is gay men's catnip.
What was it like? You weren't a gay man yet. So, like, do you remember what it was that captured you as like a little gay boy? You mentioned the colors and the vibrancy and singing the songs. Were there parts that like were your favorites?
Oh gosh. I just remember the emotional waves I would go through watching it. Like I found like Miss Gulch very scary and frightening, and she's gonna take your dogs, and like that's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, right? And then like she's separated from her family, and then she's confronted with all these like scary kind of munchkins. And so just like as a kid, it felt like every scene was more imaginative than the last. And it just keeps escalating and escalating. And you have such a powerful, iconic villain in the Wicked Witch of the West. And you have such sympathetic characters. Your first crush is probably the Scarecrow or the Tin Man, whether you realize it or not.
Hmm. Did you feel that? Like, did you feel like maybe not a crush or maybe yes, but that these were your friends? Like, did you feel an emotional connection to these characters?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Scarecrow is the one I identified with maybe the most. I had these little plastic, they almost looked like Happy Meal toys, but they were much more expensive, I assure you. Uh, Little figurines that I'd carry around with me in my lunchbox of the various figures, and not even the main cast. I mean, they had figures of like the mayor of Munchkinland and the coroner and stuff. And I'm like, you're all my friends. You're coming with me wherever I go. I had Hallmark used to do these collectible porcelain plates that had scenes from the movies on them. And so a lot of little Oz fans my age probably have dozens of them in their garage somewhere.
How old were you when you were collecting commemorative porcelain plates?
Four.
That is
And
incredibly precious.
every time we went to the mall, it was me going to the Hallmark store and basically throwing a tantrum until we walked out of there with Ray Bolger's likeness on a porcelain plate.
What would you like eat off of them or would you display them? Like, how does a 4-year-old enjoy a collection?
We would display a couple of them, but it got to a point where I had too many. So they would just sit in a box and I would rotate them periodically.
Oh, that is marvelous. I had that with the Fraggles. I had stuffed Fraggles who were my conf in the same way you're describing like the coroner and Ray Bolger and like all these characters in your lunchbox. I would have the Fraggles that I carried everywhere.
I mean, that feels right, but also, we're of an age where Wizard of Oz was a big, big, big thing. That movie was very iconic. There were toys and anniversary specials. I think Angela Lansbury had one that we taped from TV that I must have watched 100 times. So it was like one of the main franchises for children at the time.
You mentioned like the emotional ride of watching that movie. Can you talk about the feeling that like watching and also just like thinking about Oz? Like what kind of feeling did that movie give you?
I think the feeling that watching The Wizard of Oz gave me as a child is this sense of just kind of wonder and whimsy and fantasy that it felt kind of sophisticated, right? It's telling jokes for the children. They're colorful things to latch onto, but they're in this kind of wry humor throughout it. There's a little bit of wit in The Wizard of Oz and kind of tongue-in-cheek elements that I think I gravitated towards it because I thought I was a smart kid, right? So you definitely go for things that kind of have that little bit of wordplay. Like I didn't know who Romeo and Juliet was at the time, but because the Tin Man is singing about it, I can pick up context clues. And then I'm telling my mom about Romeo and Juliet that night, and she's like, "You're 6. What on earth are you doing?"
Well, I was going to ask, like, how did people respond to your fandom when you were young, both adults and peers your age?
Well, I mean, I think this was egged on by both of my grandmothers who at every turn would buy me the toys or the t-shirts or the collectible plates. And so I think they got a big kick out of it because just based off of their age, that movie kind of came into being around when they were that age, right? And so I think there is a generational passing on this thing that was meaningful to them, to me, that I really thought was great. As I got older, I became a little more self-conscious of my Wizard of Oz fandom. Unfortunately, it's something that I was bullied a little bit about in early elementary school, and I think like a lot of queer kids, you reel in some of those elements of yourself, maybe for safety. And those Wizard of Oz collector's plates stayed in the garage for another 2 decades.
Yeah, can you tell me a little about the bullying? Like, what do you recall of other kids responding to what you liked?
Oh gosh, it was just people calling you sissy or fancy or other whatever the slurs of the age were. And it was more like it made you feel like there was something wrong with what you liked. But in reality, The Wizard of Oz was the most mainstream film ever made. And so if anything, they're the ones that were like that, were the outsiders to this obsession of mine.
Yeah, it sounds like if anything, that sort of entrenches you as, like the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion, who have been convinced that there's something wrong with them, eventually learning, no, actually, I'm perfectly fine how I am. Everything I need, I already have. But you do have to go through kind of a gauntlet before you come to that realization.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously there's so many queer parallels of found family and people who are lacking or see themselves as lacking these traits coming together and forming this unit where they're stronger than ever and they can take on the Wicked Witch and the Scarecrow can become the new wizard, right? Like you can defy your own expectations for yourself by finding community.
Did you find other queer kids, or do you have any sense of the gayness of the Wizard of Oz?
Not really. As a child, I knew that there were children that loved the Wizard of Oz because I saw the dolls and the toys and the toy shop, and I knew that there was a thriving thing. Maybe I just assumed it was mostly for girls, but when I was able to connect to queer people as a young man, or my best friend growing up is queer, the Wizard of Oz was just something we had as our shared canon. We never even thought to discuss it like it was something unusual about us.
Well, tell me about eventually discovering more of a fandom. I know that there was a period where you got to go to an Oz convention.
Yeah. So the amazing thing about The Wizard of Oz is this fandom goes back to like the 1910s. And so there is a direct connection with the people who run the Wizard of Oz conventions today in the Midwest and on the West Coast to those founding members way back when L. Frank Baum was handwriting letters, from his estate Oscott. And so the modern conventions, they're big and grand, and they really celebrate the cosplay and the fun and the whimsy and wicked. Uh, and I think there's as much that as there is this looking to the past. There's a lot of historical work that kind of puts these books in context of the era they came from. And I think that's really important to kind of see the history behind these fictional worlds that we have inhabited in our brain for so long.
What's important to know about the historical context of the stories as they're being told?
So I think The Wizard of Oz is something everyone knows. And as a result, there are a lot of people who think they know a little bit more and they want to impress you and be like, oh, it's really about uh, trying to make silver the standard currency in the United States, or this was really that politician, or whatever it is. And I think kind of separating the myth from the fact is the ongoing work of these Oz historians out there.
Why is this story so important that it has historians? Like, there's so many books and so many franchises and properties. What is it about Oz, going all the way back to those original novels, that makes it important enough and resonant enough, significant enough to people that people devote so much study to it?
Oh gosh, I think every story wants to be the Wizard of Oz. It's the great American myth, it's the great American fairy tale. It's it's so clever in that everything you wanted was with you all along. And it seems so obvious now. But I think at the time, to have a story that was rooted really in Americana, that people could look at, that Americans could look at and see, like, we have great stories too. We're not just reading old Brothers Grimm's fairy tales from the old world. We're generating our own iconography. We're generating our own myths. And it kind of like comes on the coattails of like these tall tales, right? Like you've got like your Paul Bunyan or Pecos Bill or whatever. And that kind of turned into this kind of like West Coast canon of mythological figures, and the Wizard of Oz sits right beside them.
That's so interesting in such a fairy tale sort of way. So like it has so many of the like the tropes, like you want to get really Jungian about it, but it's got so many of those like Grimm Brothers Grimm tropes. But you're right, told in a way that feels more I mean, literally it is America. I mean, there are American characters who reference specific actual places in America. And also it takes place in sort of a fantasy parallel universe. So it's not like Pecos Bill or Slewfoot Sue or something. It really does imagine sort of a fairy realm that is also somewhat American.
Yeah, and you know, the Emerald City is a department store.
Yeah.
It's a place with everything for everyone. And the idea of a store that wasn't just like the feed store or the blacksmith or whatever, like you could have it all under one roof, was the most cosmopolitan, incredible thing you could imagine living in the prairie.
Yeah, gosh, it makes me think of like how Chicago must have seemed to somebody coming out. I mean, even like out of Kansas City, but like, coming to the big city in the late 1800s or early 1900s. What that captures is America's turning from something a little bit more rural and
Mhm.
agrarian into a place with like real legitimate cities, especially as they're, cataclysmically falling apart and getting rebuilt after earthquakes and fires.
Sure. No, that's really interesting. I think the the rise of American cities kind of in the early 1900s, like kind of coincides with the the, the birth of the Wizard of Oz. And yeah, I think the Wizard of Oz is a lot more contemporary than we give it credit for, even 100 years ago. I think it's a story that has a lot of staying power, and I think it really reflects this nostalgia for the prairie and the plains, but also an eye towards the future.
You know, this is a very half-formed idea, but as we're talking
Hmm.
about it, I'm realizing that another thing that coincides with the rise of the American city is the invention or the establishing of queer culture and, an intergenerational sort of queer existence instead of just, people finding each other out and, on the farm or whatever, that there's something a little bit more with a little bit more permanence in a city.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you leave your gray existence in Kansas and you go to a Technicolor dream world, uh, and you're interacting with types of people you've never met before. But at least in the Wizard of Oz, they're all familiar faces. They're all friends, right? Everyone there is here to help you and support you and uplift you. And Dorothy is the queer one using the lexicon of the age. She's the one that does. She's the outsider to this world,
Hmm.
but is welcomed with open arms.
In one of the novels, the character, I just learned about the character. I forget his name. It's something like Jack Quickfoot or something like that. Is a character in a later novel who has 12 legs, and Scarecrow has some line to him. He says something about how noble it is to be different, that somebody who is like everyone else is a credit to society, but someone who is unique unto themselves is a credit to themselves. And it's such a heartwarming and seemingly very modern to us attitude that there's something wonderful about being unusual and being a freak.
Yeah, I think there is something to this colorful cast of characters that exist in the early books, and it even extends even to the oh my God, the Fabulous 40, I believe they call the first 40 books, and even beyond that. But there is this like you are an exception, but that makes you exceptional. You know what I mean? Like the thing that you're lacking in is also what you're bringing to the table.
So let's, go back to your experience at the Oz convention. So can you paint a picture for me of like how you learned about it existing and what your expectations were going in?
Yeah, so we're us casual Oz fans really were resting on the shoulder of giants that have been keeping this fandom alive from, oh gosh, The Wiz to today. And a lot of that is through panel discussions, through archival work. They do reproductions of classic L. Frank Baum stage musicals of The Wizard of Oz that he produced way back when. And it's really just a community to kind of celebrate this innocence, this childhood innocence I think we're all yearning for. And I think the fandom has really exploded in the past couple of years because of this excitement of Wicked. And I think it's brought a lot of fresh eyes and also fresh points of view on the original material, not just the MGM musical, but obviously the books. And so I think it's been interesting because I think Oz fandom's been ready for this moment for a long time, and now it's finally happening.
Have you found ways to connect with other queer people? Like, have you found other, queerness within the fandom, either at conventions or online or wherever?
Yes, I would say the majority, or at least the plurality of people who attend these Wizard of Oz conventions, certainly the organizers, would identify as queer. And, these groups have been going on for so long. This was not always a safe world, if not now, even to be openly queer. But at a Wizard of Oz convention, you can be whoever you want. It's like you were talking about, whether you're lacking a brain or a heart, or you're a hungry tiger who's obsessed with eating babies, like you're all welcome in Oz.
Is it easier for queer people, like within the fandom? Like, is there, I think sometimes within fandoms that go back to historical media, it is difficult for queer people still to express themselves and be open, be out. Have you found it like to be a more accepting fandom for like specifically talking about queer issues and, for people just to declare who they are?
Yeah, I think a lot of fandoms, not just exclusive to Oz, though, I think it gives, once you start expressing a side of yourself that you keep hidden or withheld from people, it becomes harder to keep the rest of you hidden, right? And so it creates this opening. Oh, I like The Wizard of Oz and I'm proud of that. And it's like, well, I showed this side of myself and I'm not getting any blowback. I'm being celebrated for it. Let me show even more of myself to you. And I think that's kind of the beauty of fandom in some ways. People can live their truth through their love of these shared worlds.
Have you looked at other adaptations? Obviously, there's the books and there's 39 film. Um, there, Return to Oz, or the many
Mm.
other television series that were inspired by it. How do they compare to the feeling that you get from the Oz stuff that you truly love?
The books are something that I discovered after the movie because I was raised with the movie and I wasn't able to read until, you get to a certain age. But I think the most interesting thing about The Wizard of Oz is how radically you can reinterpret the text, whether it be through The Wiz or Return to Oz is kind of a dark fantasy that really embraces that darkness within the original books. Or you have something like Oz the Great and Powerful, which is meant to just be like an overblown Hollywood, fantasy film. And the stories, the fundamentals are always there, and they always still work. That's why Oz is the great American myth. Is that the MGM version we know was celebrating, I think, the 50th anniversary of the book being released. There's something inherent to this endless nostalgia we have for this story, but also we want to contemporize it and make it something that's accessible today.
Do you see in Wicked, the musical, either on stage or on screen, is there a queerness to that story that echoes the queerness that excited you when you were young?
I think Wicked does an excellent job of spotlighting the underdog, spotlighting the outsider in a way that The Wizard of Oz itself has always done, but it makes it a little more pointed. It adds maybe some urgency or some relevancy to what happens today for people who have a different skin tone or identify as queer or disabled or this or that. And so I do think that in the past few years, you've seen this explosion of interest in Wicked, and some of that comes from a lot of disadvantaged groups who see themselves in the alphabet character and see themselves in an oppressed situation like alphabet is or the capital A animals are in Oz.
Oz has had a lot of custodians, I guess, or people who take it on as sort of like their milieu and where they want to tell stories. Going back, L. Frank Baum invents it, and then, like you said, there's so much room in the text to interpret. A lot of people have said, "Oh, I'm going to do something with this." Are there particular people who you think have done like an especially good job, or people that you've had experiences with yourself that you're like, oh, you really you get it. You are a good custodian for Oz.
The Wizard of Oz fandom is vast, and the two names that come immediately to mind for me are Eric Shanower and David Maxine. They run OzCon International every year, which is a big gathering of people from all over the country and beyond, just celebrating Wizard of Oz. They do historical research, they do reproductions of classic Baum stage musicals that he produced way back when, and they do cosplay and they do dinners, and it's a real love letter to this fandom that's been around for so long. And it has a real direct connection to those original Wizard of Oz clubs way back in the 1910s.
Do you participate in Oz fandom much at this point?
Not especially, but I would say that my own home, it becomes a Wizard of Oz convention every so often.
In what way?
Just the music starts playing, the singing starts to come out. It's like I'm that 4 year old little gay kid singing to my grandma all over again, except now I'm singing to my dog.
Do you get the same feeling? Like, do you have the same, just like emotional, I don't know, zhuzh that you got when you were a kid?
I really do. I think that there's a lot of power to these stories and the MGM movie in particular. I have a big Return to Oz poster from the film. I love The Wiz. So really any version of this story, but it all comes back to, for at least for me, that Judy Garland sitting in the farm and singing about how she wants more. And I think that's even as a kid, you could relate to that.
What kind of influence do you think it's had on the work that you do today? Well, first, like, can you describe the work that you do now? And do you think Oz has an influence on it?
Yeah, in my writing and comic books and interactive media, I think the Wizard of Oz kind of is always front of mind. I think I hope to write a story that has as much meaning or as much heart as L. Frank Baum was able to put together so long ago. And I think the clarity of that original book is what makes its staying power so effective. And I think to tell a story that can be interpreted by my great grandmother or someone who's going to be alive in 200 years from now, like that's excellent storytelling. That's the great American myth.
Do you still encounter queer Oz fans today?
Oh, constantly. In my little discords, we're talking, sharing wicked headlines and memes and talking about Judy Garland and which of the three friends would you date? Are you more of a lion? Are you more of a scarecrow? That sort of thing. So it is something that's constantly in the mix. And I think with queer people in particular, it's one of our foundational texts.
What is it that you think is so timeless about it for queer people? What it means to be a queer person has changed a lot over the last hundred and something years. Um, what is it to queer people today? Like, what is Oz to queer people now? Like, why is it still relevant?
I think what makes The Wizard of Oz so relevant today is the purity of it. I think the heart of the story, Dorothy's desire to come home and to come home, quite frankly, a stronger, better, more understanding, and more empathetic person than she was when she left, I think is really powerful. I think everyone wishes that they had three great friends, like the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion. And I think a lot of queer people feel isolated, but to know that there is a place, whether it be real or imagined, like going over the rainbow, that you're always welcome to, and where nothing bad will ever hurt you, I think is the most powerful story you could possibly tell.
And those are all things I think that are particularly resonant, I think, to any person and especially to a marginalized group, and in particular to for queer people. Like those, that is a real specific need that an outgroup like queers, I think, frequently have and can identify with.
Yeah, and I think as we've gotten so much of the queer canon, so much of your work has been kind of exploring that and putting it in context. Uh, I think The Wizard of Oz still stands front and center as one of those great stories that will always be relevant to the queer community.
Do you remember when you saw part one of Wicked, how you felt coming out of that film?
Which of the six times seeing Wicked in theaters are you referring to?
What
Um,
was your emotional roller coaster over those six viewings?
Oh, it seeing Wicked for the first time felt like a revelation. I will admit that it is a the stage musical is imperfect at times, but still very captivating. I thought John Chu and the cast of the film did a remarkable job adapting it for film and making it capture some of that grandiosity, that magic from the original MGM film, and it's willing to wear its influences on its sleeve. I In a way that a lot of Oz adaptations have been kind of afraid to or legally forbidden from doing for so long.
So how does that feel for you to see?
I mean, I remember listening to the Wicked soundtrack with basically the first guy I ever had a date with, and it blew my mind. And now, 20 years later, we're not together, but he has a kid and he's playing Wicked and singing Wicked to his kid. And I'm singing it to my dog and my porcelain plates. But the journey we've been on since then is so incredible. I can't even imagine being a little kid who grew up in the prairie and seeing themselves as Dorothy, and then 50 years later, whatever it is, going to see the Wizard of Oz, the MGM version on the big screen. I
Yeah.
imagine it felt a little bit like that.
Yeah, wow. It's remarkable that, you can still, there's still so much emotion to bring out of that. So much of it that still feels, oh, this is speaking to me, in my life that is incredibly different, and yet somehow I'm feeling the same thing.
Yeah, there's no place like home.
Josh, thank you so much for chatting with me about all this stuff.
Oh, of course, anytime.